I was standing about 12 feet from the barrier when it happened. Not the kind of distance where you catch everything clearly. You know how it is outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd shifts, someone lifts a phone, a tour guide starts talking too loud, and suddenly you've missed the moment entirely. But that day I had a clear line of sight. I don't know why. Maybe it was the angle. Maybe it was because the woman next to me had stepped back to adjust her camera strap at exactly the right second. Whatever the reason, I saw it. And I've been thinking about it ever since. It was a Tuesday in late October. One of those mornings that can't quite decide what it wants to be, cold enough that you could see your breath, but with this stubborn, pale sunlight pushing through the clouds like it hadn't gotten the memo yet. The kind of morning where Londoners walk faster than usual with their chins tucked down, but tourists still stop and pull out their phones every 30 seconds. I was there for no particular reason, honestly. I'd had a meeting cancelled near Victoria and had an hour to kill. I wandered up Buckingham Gate, bought a terrible coffee from a cart near the corner, and ended up drifting toward the palace the way you do when you're in that part of the city with nowhere urgent to be. The forecourt was its usual self. A cluster of tourists near the main gates, the kind of loose, shifting crowd that doesn't have a leader, everyone nudging slowly toward the front, everyone wanting the best spot without quite admitting they want the best spot. There were school children, too, a group of maybe 30, in matching yellow high-visibility vests that made them look like tiny road workers. They were pressed together near the left side of the fence, their teacher doing that thing teachers do, counting heads every 45 seconds with a slightly desperate expression. 2 guards were posted at the gate. The one on the right I barely noticed. Standard posture, standard everything. The one on the left, he was the one. His name, I later found out, was not something that ever got made public in any formal way. I'll call him what the woman beside me called him afterward, the tall one, because that's genuinely what he was. Unusually tall, even by the standards of the household division, which doesn't exactly recruit short men. He stood with that absolute stillness they train into them, the kind of stillness that stops being impressive at some point and starts being slightly unnerving, like a human being had decided to become architecture for a while. His bearskin hat was perfectly level. His jaw was set. His eyes, from where I stood, were fixed at some precise middle distance, not at us, not at the building behind him, but at something that doesn't exist in the physical world. That disciplined gaze. I sipped my coffee and watched for a bit, the way you do. The motorcade arrived at around 10:30. I didn't know what it was at first, just a ripple in the crowd, people turning toward the road, a couple of police motorcycles appearing from the direction of the mall. Then the cars. Black, official-looking, moving at that particular pace that official cars move at in London, not fast, not slow, deliberately measured, as if speed itself is beneath them. Word moved through the crowd the way it does. Someone important. A few people said the Prime Minister. Someone else said a foreign dignitary. I heard 3 different names suggested in about 90 seconds, which told me nobody actually knew. But the cameras came out regardless, that reflex people have now, photograph first, understand later. The cars pulled up. There was a brief moment of organized activity near the gate, aides, I assumed, a couple of people with lanyards moving purposefully in the way that people with lanyards always do. And then the Prime Minister did step out. I recognized him immediately. He's not the kind of face you mistake for someone else. He paused near the car, shook a hand, said something to the aide beside him that made the aide nod twice very quickly. Then he began walking toward the gate, and there was that particular atmosphere that forms around powerful people in public, a kind of invisible circle, people instinctively creating space without being asked to, the crowd pulling back half a step without knowing why. The school children, to their teacher's audible dismay, did not pull back. They surged forward actually, because children don't have that instinct yet, or maybe they just don't care, and 30 small humans in yellow vests pressing toward the fence made the teacher go slightly pale. Class, stay together, please. That's when I first noticed her. She was near the end of the group, smaller than the others, which is saying something given they were all fairly small. She had dark hair in 2 plaits, one of which was already coming undone, the kind of thing that happens by mid-morning when you're 7 or 8 years old and have been on a school trip. Her yellow vest was slightly too big and kept slipping off one shoulder. She wasn't pushing forward with the others. She was just standing there, close to the fence, looking at the tall guard. Not the way most children look at the guards, that mixture of fascination and theatrical daring, elbowing each other, daring someone to try to make him laugh. She wasn't doing any of that. She was just looking at him, with this very direct, very serious expression on her face. The guard, of course, did not look back. He stared at his non-existent middle distance. The motorcade activity continued. The Prime Minister was perhaps 20 feet away now, speaking to someone near the gate, doing that combination of greeting and forward movement that politicians are good at, always appearing to pay full attention while also definitely moving toward the next thing. I watched the girl take a small step closer to the fence. She reached up, not to grab the fence, just to place her hand against one of the black iron bars, the way a child does when they want to feel something rather than just see it. And she looked up at the guard, properly up, because he was very tall and she was very small, and she said something. I couldn't hear it from where I stood. Her lips moved, short sentence. Maybe 5 or 6 words delivered quietly, directed upward at the side of his face. He didn't move. For about 3 seconds he didn't move at all, and I assumed that was it. The guard ignores the child gives up, the moment passes. Standard. Then something happened to his face. It was subtle, that's what I keep coming back to when I try to describe it. It wasn't dramatic. His posture didn't change, he didn't turn his head. But something around his eyes, a tightening, or maybe a loosening, I genuinely can't decide which, shifted. Some small, involuntary thing crossed his face that he hadn't meant to let happen. The woman beside me saw it too. I know because she made a very quiet sound, the kind you make when you see something unexpected. And then slowly, almost mechanically, like a man overriding his own training 1 millimeter at a time, he looked down. Just his eyes, not his head. Just his eyes dropped very briefly to where she was standing at the fence below him. She said something else. Still couldn't hear it, still just lips moving. But whatever it was brief, just a handful of words again, delivered with that same small, matter-of-fact seriousness she'd had from the start. The guard held that position, eyes down, face showing something I can only describe as controlled struggle, for what felt longer than it was. Maybe 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then he looked back up. Back to the middle distance. But his jaw had changed. That set locked-in certainty his jaw had carried when I first noticed him, it was slightly different now. Not broken, but something had moved behind it. None of this, I should say, had taken very long. The whole sequence, girl approaches fence, girl whispers, guard reacts, guard recovers, had lasted maybe 30 seconds. Less, possibly. The crowd around me was mostly still watching the Prime Minister, who was now very close to the gate, finishing his conversation with whoever it was. But he had also seen it. Or heard something, at least. I can't say precisely what made him look in that direction. Maybe it was the woman's quiet sound beside me. Maybe it was the shift in the crowd. Maybe it was just peripheral motion, a tall guard's eyes doing something eyes at that post aren't supposed to do. But the Prime Minister looked toward the guard. He was mid-sentence when he did it. I watched his mouth stop moving. Not interrupted, not distracted by a question. He just stopped. The aide he was speaking to waited, looked mildly uncertain, and glanced in the same direction without apparently finding anything to explain the pause. The Prime Minister looked at the guard. Then he looked down, following whatever sightline the guard had briefly had, and saw the girl at the fence, standing there in her slightly too big yellow vest with her undone plate, one small hand still resting against the iron bar. She wasn't looking at the Prime Minister. She was still looking at the guard. The Prime Minister watched for a moment. Then he said something to his aide, quietly. The aide nodded but looked uncertain, that specific look aides get when they're agreeing to something slightly off schedule. The Prime Minister walked toward the fence. He stopped a few feet away. He crouched down slightly, which powerful men do when they want to speak to children, and it always looks slightly awkward, and he said something to her. I still couldn't hear. I was too far. The crowd noise was too much. A bus had chosen that exact moment to rumble past on the road behind us. But I could see her face. She looked at the Prime Minister the way she'd looked at the guard, that same direct, unimpressed, very focused expression. As if adults in expensive suits crouching down to speak to her was simply a thing that happened, and she'd give it appropriate attention. She said something back to him, short answer. Then she glanced back up at the guard. The Prime Minister also looked up at the guard. The guard was back to full protocol, staring forward, face neutral. Whatever had moved through him in those few seconds had been carefully replaced with standard-issue composure. But the Prime Minister had seen the earlier version. The changed jaw, the brief descent of the eyes. He must have caught some part of it because he didn't look at the guard with the polite blankness of a man looking at scenery. He looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to read something. He straightened up, nodded once to the girl, and returned to his group. His aide said something. He gave a short reply, and they moved on through the gate. Afterward, the crowd settled back into its normal low-level motion. The school group was herded away by the relieved teacher. The girl with the undone plate walked off with them, already talking to the girl beside her about something completely different. The way children do, moving from one important moment directly into the next, without stopping to consider the one they've just left. I stood there a bit longer. The guard resumed his previous existence as architecture. I looked at him for a while, trying to see if there was any remaining evidence of what had happened, trying to catch the trace of it in the set of his face. But he was perfect again. Whatever she had reached with those words, it was back behind the bearskin hat and the trained gaze and the absolute stillness, back where it was supposed to be. The woman beside me had stayed too. She was looking at the guard the way I was. We didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, almost to herself rather than to me, "I wonder what she said." I said I'd been wondering the same thing. She thought about it for a second, then she said, "Whatever it was kind." I asked her why she thought that. She considered it, because unkind things don't make someone look down like that. Unkind things make you look away. He looked down. I didn't have anything to add to that. I've turned it over many times since then. The most practical explanation, the one that requires the least, is that she said something personal, something that accidentally matched a detail of his life she couldn't have known. Children do that occasionally. They make observations or ask questions that arrive too close to something real, and it catches you entirely unprepared. Or maybe she said something to him about the job itself, about standing still for so long, about whether he ever got cold. Some small observation about his existence that nobody else in that crowd had thought to make, because everybody else was looking at him and seeing a symbol, a thing in a uniform, part of the scenery, part of the image of the place. And she had looked at him and seen a person standing there for a very long time in October weather and said something human about it. That's the version I find myself returning to. That she just noticed him, actually noticed him the way most of the crowd hadn't. And for a royal guard trained to withstand the full force of the public's indifference and curiosity and noise and occasional rudeness. All of that taken in stride, none of it getting through. The one thing that did get through was a child simply treating him like a human being who had a day going on inside that uniform. The Prime Minister stopped speaking because he saw it. He saw the moment land. He saw whatever crossed that guard's face, and he walked over because he wanted to understand what had just cut through all of that discipline, what small thing had managed to find its way in. I don't know what she whispered, but I think the woman beside me was right.